So I invite our great principal sir, who is a torch bearer to all this institute and behind all the development and new innovation to this institute, our inspiration, our role model, Dr. Vijay Kumar Banga, who is accelerating all the departments uniquely in an innovating way. So because of his inspiration, we are able to do this event. So sir, please welcome our Honorable Chief Guest Kalidas Shetty sir from North Dakota University. Thank you, sir.
I'm extremely thankful and grateful to Dr. Shetty, who is chief guest for today event and chief speaker for today event. He is from North Dakota State University, United States of America. And I'm extremely honored to have such a great speaker on our institution webinar. And it's a great effort by our team. And I'm extend my best wishes, especially for our agriculture department, which headed by Dr. Maninder Singh Gill, and coordinated this event by Dr. Bhatt, and chief coordinator for this event, Mr. Raghav Vashisht, who planned this event for our students so that they will get a benefit from our eminent expert on the topic of agriculture biotechnology. So it's a biotechnology. We all know this is the science which we all need in agriculture today, so that we can make fulfill the need of the ever expanding population of our whole world. And it's Dr. Shetty has a very vast experience in this area. Like, they are very closely working in sustainable and ecological base for health food systems, food choices, and food security. So this is he is a pioneer in this field. I hope today Dr. Shetty highlight our students about this whole food mechanism, food chain, and how this whole population of this world will utilize it biotechnology, so that we able to get a food properly and a healthy food to the all population. So it's a big responsibility on the shoulders of biotechnologists and along with the agriculturist. So it's a wonderful opportunity for our students who will get this four deliberations on this agriculture biotechnology. So once again, I am extremely honored and thankful to Dr. Shetty for sparing his valuable time on our invitation and enlightening our students with their vast knowledge and their fantastic, possibly it's a life learning lecture from him to our students. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Shetty. Thank you. That is it from my side, as I am little bit I am occupied in some family function. That's why I am a little bit late to join this event, but I'm thankful to all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And once again, I find immense pleasure in introducing our Honorable Chief Guest, Professor Kalidas Shetty sir, who is the Associate Vice President for International Partnership and Collaboration and Professor of Plant Sciences, North Dakota State University, Fargo, USA. Presence of such eminent global personality in this program is a kind of blessing. We are really thankful to you, sir, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend, to give a lecture to our students. Basically, your research interest, basically research based, focused on the critical role of cellular and metabolic basis of oxygen biology, for advancing new innovations in life sciences and especially agriculture and food innovation that advances global food security and health in a sustainable environment. This focus is contributing to very innovative advances in the area of crop for health, post-harvest biology, nutraceuticals, functional food, and food antimicrobial strategy as critical innovation to advance food security in addition to malnutrition and hunger challenges. In particular, he has developed an innovative crop for health research platform to counter diet-linked chronic diseases. The rationale of this platform has relevance for managing malnutrition challenges from maternal to child health needs globally. He is affiliated to a number of global professional bodies, Institute of Food Technologies, Asia Pacific Clinical Nutrition Society, American Society of Microbiology, American Chemical Society, American Association for Advancement of Sciences, American Society of Plant Biologists. I'm happy to share with you all that he is presently working on new innovation to advance global food security and a graph for health and sustainable platform. I hope that a student will be able to seek a little guidance and imbibe something from his thought, learning, and vision. I request, sir, enlighten the lamp of knowledge to our faculty, students, and all the team members and this audience. So if I'm talking about his educational experience, his PhD, he did his PhD in 1989 in the microbiology subject, University of Idaho, Moscow, ID, and in then MS 1985, Bacteriology, University of Idaho, Moscow, BS in 1983, Agriculture Sciences, University of Agriculture Sciences, Bangalore, India. He's a vast experience, vast research publications, and a number of he has held number of positions in the global universities, and he has a number of editor. He is the editor, chief editor in number of journals. One of my publication was blessed by Dr. Sir. So, sir, I invite you to bless my students with your research and knowledge and vision. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bhatt, for a kind introduction. And so I'm going to share my slide. Where is it? Oh. Okay. Okay. I can see it. Share. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay, wonderful.
Great, sir.
Can you see my entire slide?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bhatt, for your kind invitation. So what I'm going to present to you is a perspective on metabolic innovations. As you know, genetics shaped a lot of the green revolution, and then genetic engineering was the tool from DNA to mRNA to protein but then the metabolic consequences are the ones that respond to the ecology and have the feedback loops. So a lot of the advances are going to be shaped by how we understand the ecological perspective shaping the core metabolism, and then from there the feedback loops back into genetic adaptation. So ecology shapes genetics, so that's a very key point. And so within that, the metabolic fluxes that are regulating are key. So these are, I will use this logic to show how we can advance the global food system, and in particularly at a very challenging time for humanity, where we are in the midst of climate change. And so we need climate resilient food systems that are adaptable, but also the green revolution was good in meeting macronutrient needs, but we are facing a new challenge, which is nutritional chronic diet-linked chronic diseases, which is growing more rapidly than the undernourishment, which is still there. But I'll come to these points in a few minutes. So we need a much more robust, health-targeted, climate-resilient food system. So how do we achieve this? And what is the metabolic rationale to shaping this based on the Earth's ecosystem? So because any responses, any design has to be based within the perspective of a carbon-based biology, which is carbon dioxide, which is essentially when water is split, it is hydrating carbon. That's why we call it carbohydrate. So how is the solar-driven process coupling carbon and water and then nitrogen and oxygen? So everything has to happen within these four elements. And what is the rationale of how do we work with that? So that's what I'm going to sort of show you today, the rationale of that, the metabolic innovations and the ecology behind this, and how do we systematically address many of the deficiencies in our agriculture and food system, and then build a more systems-based approach based on the control points at the metabolic level. So if you look at the world innovation economy in the 19th century and then into 20th century, especially in the early part of the 20th century, we had the atomic revolution as we understood the electrons, proton, neutrons. By the mid 20th century, we learned Watson and Crick. We discovered the DNA, and then what happens from the DNA, mRNA, protein synthesis. And so as we deciphered this, by the end of the 20th century, we moved into the silicon computer revolution. But now in the 21st century, as we look at the global innovation economy, we have three areas of biology. One is our environment, which is in the midst of what some suspect to be in the midst of a sixth extinction. So the Earth had already 5 extinctions in the past, which I'll come to in a few minutes. But some say we are in the midst of moving towards the 6th extinction because the biological systems that are part of the environment now, 1/3 of the species we have lost in the last 100 years. So right now, the biggest challenge as we have all of these technology revolutions emerging, how does the environment and biological system, how are they balanced as the Earth is warming up? What is the role of human biology? Is a human being more empathetic, compassionate, more understanding of this environmental balance? Or are we suicidal that we are going to allow the 6th extinctions to emerge? Largely by the environmental damage that we do that's creating the challenges, particularly fossil fuel-based global warming that we are in the midst of. And as we build these machine tools, how are these 4 pillars of the global systems approach to the global innovation economy going to emerge? And within this, how is the environment and biology and the agriculture that is integrated within this, how is it going to advance? So in our lifetime, these are going to be the 4 pillars of the global innovation economy, where systems logic is going to dictate. So what I mean by systems logic is, it is not the components of a system that are important, but the control point that balance the system that are important. So hypothesis should be driven by the control points of the overall system from which many manifestation and outcomes emerge. So these outcomes and applications can only be managed at the control point level, and I will allude to this later in terms of biology and in agriculture. So we're in a time of systems biology, systems integration, where control points are going to shape how we're going to drive the innovation forward. What keeps the system together? What are the control points of the system? So that's going to drive innovation. So we need to think that way, not on the components, but on the system control points. So, for example, as we go into AI and information revolution, the information is important, but the context and relevance of the information is going to be dictated by how is the control point shaping the relevance of the information in different energy needs, agriculture needs, health needs. So what are those control points? So within that, if you look at the world today, we are a population about 7.4 billion today. And by 2050, we are projected to be about 9 billion. And we are, of course, the COVID has had some impact, but we are still living longer. And right now, the world average childbearing is about 2.3. We are still sort of growing, but we are not going to grow as much as we are projected. So it's expected by different models. By the end of 2100, we may reach about 10.8 billion or so. So little above 9 billion, because we're slowly saturating, and in many parts of the world we are not even replacing population. Even within India, like states like Kerala is not replacing, or Japan, they are having 1.9. So you need 2.1 to replace population. And so with that challenge, say a 10.5 billion population by end of the century, since 2000, we are not only facing hunger. 1 billion of our population on the planet is still facing hunger. A lot of it in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. But there's more of us, about 1.5 billion of us in a 7.4 billion, who are moving towards high macronutrient, high refined calorie, and moving towards non-communicable chronic disease. So we have we have built too many calories for our own good, that when we have the micronutrient imbalance, we have this breakdown towards non-communicable chronic disease. So now, as much as malnourishment is still a problem for 1 billion people, then 1.5 to 2 billion of us moving towards this obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease system. So our agriculture food system needs to be reconstructed so that we have the balance of the macronutrient and micronutrient. So it's not just enough to have calories, but we need to have optimized calories so that we are not moving towards these calorie burdens in a sedentary lifestyle that we live. So since 2000, the global obesity-linked chronic disease epidemic is growing at a faster rate than the malnourishment problem that we have. So this is a new phase of global food security, which is a lot of excess, highly refined calories. So we have enough calories for 12 billion people on this planet when we are only 7.4 billion people. So a lot of us are getting too many calories and less micronutrients to balance it. So we are in this great challenge, and the COVID, I'll later show you that the COVID epidemic in a way, or pandemic in a way, has exposed this, because the comorbidities with chronic diseases, non-chronic disease, makes us more susceptible. So if you look around the world, comorbidity was a key element, underlying element in how much we are susceptible or not. So that's a point I'll come back to a little later. So as we move towards this, life science will be a key driver of global innovations. As I told you, the 4 pillars, 3 are biology, which is environment, the biology of the environment, and the human cognitive sciences that are going to sort of either sustain it or collapse it, and all the silicon and associated revolution that are going to come from the mechanical world. But the most important in all of this is, are we going to move away from fossil fuels, which is 60% of our energy basket now, from petroleum and coal? And this has dramatic environmental consequences on the basics of our planet, which is carbon dioxide increasing from pre-industrial 0.03% to 0.035% and to 0.04% by end of the century. And therefore, water, that's so 2 very primordial requirements, which is solar energy splitting water and carbon being hydrated from as a consequence, they are at a very critical point. And then the nitrogen that's abundant on the planet, but yet we use the fossil fuels to make abundant, by the Haber process, we make a lot of nitrogen to feed into the carbon water balance. So this is the foundation of our agriculture that we need to rethink in a more ecological way so that we do not have the carbon fossil fuel burden, also the nitrogen waste that we have doubled in the last 100 years by how much fertilization we have introduced into the water bodies and into soil systems. And another very critical is the oxygen, because we talk about the carbon fixation, carbon being hydrated and the macronutrient balance, but it's the oxygen that we breathe is really a critical breakdown that moves us towards diseases. So all these big non-communicable chronic disease or inflammation, they're all oxygen malfunction diseases. So when we look at these four components, three gases and water of this basic planet, they dictate the control points of how we need to assemble our food system and our agriculture system, and then how it impacts the health system, particularly around oxygen malfunction, which is the major basis for all the breakdown towards disease. Because we are essentially an eukaryotic oxygen dependent species. So I'll come back to this point, the evolution of this on the planet in a few slides later. And therefore, looking at these basic ecological principles of what governs biology on this planet and how we have developed energy, we need to move away from fossil fuels to an energy decentralization approach for more renewables, preserve our water. And for all of this, we need a much more systems approach, meaning how are all of these conceptual foundation sustaining the earth, and what are the control points that all are dependent on. So once we know the control point, a correction in one of the features of the overall system, for example, we move away from fossil fuels, we can make it agriculture better, we can make food systems better, we can better conserve our water. So any one of these big control points will then shape the overall stability. So we need a more systems approach where when we know the control point that makes the system, that makes it irreducible, then based on the control point, we then develop a hypothesis so that the overall system and therefore overall consequence of food, health, wellness, environment, energy, they're all managed from such a systems logic. So with that kind of perspective and larger question, if you look at the earth, we need to look at how did the earth come to where we are now? So if you look at our earth, biology is about 3 billion years ago, starting with the ancestral prokaryote. But somewhere along the line, around 2.1 billion years ago, we had the prokaryotic system becoming photosynthetic. And from 2.1 billion to about 1 billion years ago, we had the engulfing of these prokaryotic system, including the photosynthetic system. And about 900 million to 1 billion years ago, the engulfing resulted in the higher eukaryotic system or mitochondrial chloroplast-based system. And we had further organizational emergence and a rich oxygen-based life. So this oxygen mitochondrial-driven life is essentially the foundation of how solar energy is captured through splitting of water and carbon being hydrated. But it's the oxygen that controls the foundation of resilience across the eukaryotic system that came about 900 to 1 billion years ago. So this common metabolic control points and complex organization and diversity that emerged on the planet from ancient prokaryotes about 2.1 billion to 2.4 billion years ago to higher eukaryotic life much later, and their interplay, and including the ancient prokaryotes that are still part of us in our gut health or soil health or plant health, in soil health. So the ancient prokaryotes are still part of us. So this oxygen coupled life and the role of the ancient prokaryotic life in the emergence of eukaryote is the critical control that is needed to manage this common control point that we live in on this planet at this moment. So if you understand this emergence of evolutionary emergence and the control point from ancient anaerobic prokaryotic life to photosynthetic life that came 2.1 billion years ago to an oxygen-rich prokaryotic life to oxygen-rich eukaryotic life that we live, then we can understand the control points and the evolutionary emergence of all the biology that we see on the planet. So if we see this with a systems logic and what controls this biological evolution, then we can get these common metabolic control point that determines the complex organization. And using these control points, we can now develop better hypotheses to the major challenges that we face, from agriculture to food to health to energy diversification and water management. So for all these major challenges we have, the common control point of the biology is important to shape the rigor of the hypothesis for solutions. So using such logic, if you really look at how this has emerged, there are many critical rationale from evolution we can consider, but I want to look at, bring to your attention just few elements that shape how our biology is today. So if you look at our ancient biology, there's a lot of geological evidence for some of this. So if you look at this, there was a very significant impact of when our planet's about 4.6 billion years ago. But in the early phase, there was no, as the Earth was settling down, there was no really water, but it was the extraterrestrial asteroid belt that delivered water around 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago. So it's this amazing ability of water to exist in three phases, solid, liquid, and vapor, gave the early foundation for the early prokaryotic life, about 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago. So we know that prokaryotic life came around 3.5 billion, 3.6 billion years ago. But water was essential. So where did this water come from? This water really, all evidence, it came with the asteroid, and most of these asteroids were near the asteroid belt near Jupiter, which are rich source of such water. So that's one critical event that we know. Another very important event in emergence of life on the planet is a great mass extinction that occurred where 99% of existing life died between 2.4 to 2.1 billion years ago. And that is when the early so it is when early prokaryotic oxygenation emerged by early photosynthetic bacteria. The release of oxygen through a series of events eventually actually collapsed life. It cooled the planet to such an extent that it collapsed all the life. So we then had only a certain amount of photosynthetic prokaryotic oxygen-rich life in sort of warm puddles in few aerobic environments to deep ocean. So this was the only life that survived. So it's about 2.1 million years ago is when these two extreme life sort of interacted, and it is only about 900 million, about a billion years ago is when eukaryotic engulfing happened. So it is this photosynthetic, this cooling of the prokaryotes that finally rejuvenated life after 2.1 billion years. So in that 1 billion years after that is when the journey towards range of eukaryotes from prokaryotes emerged around 900 billion years ago, 900 million years ago, about a billion years ago, 1 billion years ago. So that is really when the oxygen life or eukaryotic emergence and the oxygenation emerged. So that's a very important. Then there was a very major event that allowed the mammals to emerge, which was the asteroid extinction of 65 million years ago, when an asteroid that hit somewhere near Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula. It's when the dinosaurs died. Of course, not all the dinosaurs died. Some became the birds, but major part of the major dinosaurs died. But it's allowed the mammals to emerge, and eventually, subsequently, around 1 to 4 million years ago, eventually to Homo sapiens sapiens, where majority of the human beings now are Homo sapiens sapiens, somewhere between 60,000 to 250,000 years ago. So that's where whatever the geological evidence that's telling us. So what I'm trying to point to is, how did the oxygen life emerge and the photosynthetic coupled oxygen life emerge? So there were a series of accidents on this planet that gave rise to this. And then finally, to current agriculture system, really that emerged around 20,000 years ago after the last ice age. And it's only about 10,000 years ago we started living in Neolithic communities. And that finally led to early civilization like our Harappan civilization, or the Chinese civilization, or Mesopotamian civilization, or the Nile Valley civilization, or the Mesoamerican civilization. So it is around this where the domestication and the Neolithic communities of 10,000 years ago moved towards more organized agriculture, more complete domestication. And from that domestication of these early valley civilization, valley civilization, it's only about especially the Portuguese. They are the ones who took crops from and they moved it around wherever these European mercantilism emerged. So that really is where our agriculture started being retuned, from the early river valley civilization to the Vavilor's origin of crops. So this is the foundation of our agriculture that we now need to look at as we look at climate resilient systems. So now here we are today. We are today in the midst of global warming, with the planet CO2 having moved from the pre-industrial time of 0.03% to 0.035%. And we somehow were able to correct the ozone layer, this oxygenation that gave the protection against cosmic rays and others, is still an important part of us as we resolve that. Because this carbon dioxide is so critical. It's when the solar energy splits water, it's carbon being hydrated, or carbohydrate is the foundation of our macronutrient. And from that macronutrient, we get the lipid as an inverted triacyl glycerol with an E, in a form of an E. And then when we add the nitrogen, that's 79% on the planet, we get the amino acids and the protein. So this is what we call food, the macronutrient platform. And then we have cofactors like minerals and vitamins, which have to synergize with the macronutrients. And now we are realizing it's the malfunction of too much of these carbohydrates and lipids can break down in redox breakdown that's leading to all of these chronic disease. So we need high fiber to support the microbiome, and also we need the phytochemicals to counter the oxygen malfunction. So our food is not just macronutrient, but also there are good micronutrients and minerals, but also these other phytochemicals and fiber that needs to be balanced. So as we think about a climate resilient food system that can withstand these global warming trends, we also have to see how are these food harmonized so that we have climate resilient agriculture, food security that's not only meeting hunger needs, the macronutrient needs, but also the breakdown towards chronic diseases, so that our health is important. Because if we don't watch out our comorbidities from too much of carbohydrates, while also meeting the malnutrition needs, our health can go towards breakdown in immunity, as you're seeing in many parts of the world where COVID deaths are high. Comorbidity from dietary imbalance is also high. And I'll give you some of this data in a few minutes. And also the energy, we need to move away from fossil fuels, away from petroleum and away from coal. And so we are moving from 60% energy basket being carbon to we have to move to about 50% and replace it with renewable, so that our environment is in harmony, not warming up to the point of destroying us towards extinction. And of course, within this, we have food safety, the microbial system. There are a lot of the microbes that we depend on from our evolutionary system. They are beneficial, but a lot of them can break down in food safety breakdowns too. So all of this shape our economic system. All of this shape our economic system, sustainability, and resilience. Ultimately, resilience. We have to not only withstand this, but also thrive in this. Humanity has faced this because, including Indus Valley civilization, the old ancient Saraswati civilization, it was 2,000 years ago. This climate change is what dispersed it. So we had the great Harappan period of high civilization, and it is the climate change that sort of spread the population. And this climate change was not just in Harappan Indus Valley civilization, but it was seen all over the world. So it was a calamity across the world. So this climate impact is not the first time we are facing. Humanity itself has faced it many times in recorded history. But anyway, we have to deal with what we see now. And so we have to go by the ecology that shapes the metabolic system of the biology on the planet. So if we look at that integrated systems approach, then we can address all of the challenges we face in sustainable agriculture, food security, health, energy, on the same logical platform. So that's a systems biology. We find control points of the system. Where are the weak points for harmony? And then from control points, we can address all of these challenges that we face. So with that in mind, if you look at the global agriculture food security challenges, as I already told you, we have enough calories today to feed 12 billion people. But yet 1 billion of us are still hungry. There's 1.5 billion of us having too many calories and bad calories that is leading towards non-communicable chronic disease such as type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease and on towards autoimmune and other diseases. And we now have to address all of this with climate change in mind and improvement of plant stress tolerance. And another important element, many of the antidotes for preventable chronic diseases, the fruits and vegetables, they're highly perishable, or legumes, especially the fresh fruits, they're highly perishable. So managing food preservation and safety of these perishables, which are important antidotes both for malnourishment, especially mineral malnourishment, as well as preventable chronic disease, they have to be managed. So our cold chain, our processing systems has to manage beyond just cereals and legumes towards fruits, vegetables, spices, herbs. So all of them have to be better managed with less wastage because they are the key antidotes for resilience of the overall system and the challenges that we face. So in my particular laboratory, we have looked at the challenges at these 4 levels. Still, we need to meet hunger and malnourishment needs, expecting mothers, children in the early development stage. But also the bigger challenge we face is preventable chronic disease and addressing this with climate resilience in mind and managing the waste, which are the key antidote for many of the health outcomes that we need for preventing non-communicable chronic disease. So as our population reaches 9 billion and ultimately about 10.5 billion, there's enough calories, but how do you redistribute calories to sort of readjust to these 4 major challenges that we face? So carbon can be moved around. So can we move the carbon that now can feed 12 billion to still feeding about 10 billion, but that 2 billion excess carbon that we have, can we move the carbon towards countering some of these challenges that we face in terms of food diversity, resilience, climate change? And so we know the metabolic biology of how to address that. So with this in mind, let's come to what has happened in the COVID. So the underlying mystery of COVID, if you see susceptibility, comorbidity is linked to the failure. It's linked to the failure of the food system, meaning there's a lot of us who are in this obesity, non-communicable chronic disease, comorbidity crisis. So if you look at the deaths per million across the planet as of March 23rd, if you just see what are the corona infection rates, and particularly the death rates are very, revealing. So if you see South Asia and Southeast Asia, Indonesia 140, so it's in the range of 30 to 150 deaths per million, including India is around 116 to 120 at the moment. And then particularly if you see diet diverse societies like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, it's 1 death per million. 1 death per million. Then Australia and New Zealand, 35, and Australia 5 in New Zealand. So this is the current data today, last week. And then if you see China, I don't know about that data, but Hong Kong is 27 deaths per million. Taiwan is 0.03. They managed it well. Singapore biome that supports all the way from soil health to human health. So these missing pieces are important part of the resilience towards health and agriculture sustainability, but also it's important in terms of the food ecology, okay, and sustainability of this food ecology. So this fine-tuning of the redox biology and the microbiome biology has to happen all the way from seed health to human health. Next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so therefore, a very important systems platform that agriculture has to adopt, which we did in, our traditional agriculture was always with manure and many of these overall, biology driven system. So we need to go back to that with modern tools of, genetics and other tools and correct the systems breakdown of the microbiome from soil health to plant health to human health and the ecosystem health. At every level, the microbiome biology has to be considered very closely, because it is this ancient microbiome that came to our planet about 3 billion, close to 4 billion years ago, that is still part of the eukaryotic emergence that came about 1 billion years ago. Okay, so this eukaryotic prokaryotic balance is very critical part of biology that needs to be corrected at every level of our ecosystem. Soil biology, soil health. So in agriculture, which has become a critical part of our ecosystem, this needs to be corrected. So next slide, please. Can go to the, okay. And therefore, if you look at human health, it is this high fiber bioactive enriched food is very central to supporting our probiotic environment. If our body has easily about 2 kilogram, 1.5 to 2 kilogram of such microbiome, beneficial microbiome, which is very critical for improving gut health, but the overall metabolism, immunity, chronic disease management. So at every level, we cannot just depend on high calorie refined food system. We need to have a high fiber redox controlling, oxygen correcting, oxygen malfunction correcting, bioactive enriched food system. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you see closely, one of the genesis of biology on the planet is the eukaryotic engulfing that happened 1 billion years ago. And this is where our life is. So this oxygen-rich world that we live in is critically controlled at the mitochondria, and how the mitochondria controls the pentose phosphate pathway for anabolic management. So this mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation and anabolic control and their balance is a very critical balance that's required from that needs to manage many of the cellular breakdown that can move us towards disease. So if you say inflammatory control, when does the COX-2 break down? So it starts with redox breakdown, and ultimately, damages accumulate, and then you have a whole overall system breakdown and the inflammatory pathway, tumor suppressor gene. So at every level, it's a redox coupling that breaks down towards the larger metabolic breakdown. So if we can correct that in a dietary state and have a sort of a rejuvenation type of system that manages the mitochondrial and cytosolic pentose pathway, so then we have a redox, a protective metabolic coupling from our diet that protects us. So this is also, in addition to the microbiome, managing a mitochondrial and cytosolic pentose phosphate pathway is very important part of our dietary redesign, but also agricultural redesign. Next slide, please. So if you look at this, it is the fine tuning of the oxygen biology is very much important. So these whole food profile that are rich in redox biology control and microbiome protecting is very important. And therefore, the phytochemicals that have emerged with the land plant evolution 500 million years ago is critical part of the Homo sapien evolution 2 to 3 million years ago. So this codependence of land plant system that couples the solar energy system is very critical part of the disease sensitivity regulation that's coupled around the oxygen biology and microbiome biology. So we have not considered this in our food design. We have just taken the calorie model, and the consequence of this is a very rapid rise in diet-linked chronic disease that we are seeing since 2000. And therefore, this phytochemical combinatorial profile has to be redesigned into our food system, both for our health, but also in terms of climate resilience. These are the very factors that regulate many of the critical resilience concepts that I will come to in a minute. Next slide, please. And therefore, if you look at all our major chronic diseases that we face, we have this oxygen paradox. As we have high calories and polluted environment, the mitochondrial coupling at the cytosol is under pressure. It is a breakdown at this level that, which if it's not corrected by the diet, is what leads into diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and all these oxidative breakdowns that accumulate over time. So this oxygen paradox is amazing because oxygen is a very reactive molecule with 6 electrons on the outer shell and always trying to get 2 more electrons at the oxidative phosphorylation at the last water generating step. So when this imbalance occurs, the free radicals start emerging and they can have the malfunction at different organ and levels. So if they are not corrected both by direct scavenging, but also coupling the antioxidant enzyme response with many of these protective compounds, then it degenerates towards all of these diseases. Next slide, please. And therefore, this is very much built into nature because it's the combinatorial profile that nature has built over years. As I told you, eukaryotic photosynthetic life engulfing emerged around 1 billion years ago, and land plants came 500 million years ago. And in every adaptive response and reproductive response, you have these redox coupling steps, not just phenolics, there are other compounds too, but they are involved in any of these stress adaptive as well as reproductive response in these in their different ecological niches. So if we capture all of that into a dietary matrix, then we can correct many of the imbalances we are seeing with health, but also the same regulatory mechanism are important for climate resilience as well, because these are stress adaptive and reproductive function. They are ecological requirements that we need as we try to build the diversity of food crop system for much more climate resilient needs that we need. But also they cross over into a health outcome. That therefore, if we take the common control point of the Earth's metabolism, so we can build better food system for climate resilience, but also for health. But we need a rigorous combinatorial biochemistry platform to understand those control points between the ecosystem and how we capture that ecosystem towards health and wellness as well as for climate resilience. Next slide, please. So if you see this, many of my students have worked from different parts of the world. So what we have deliberately tried to do is our ancestors picked some of these species and built different cultural framework in different parts of the world. And now we are trying to rationalize what's the biochemistry of their cultural framework. So if we understand that biochemistry in terms of currents, and then we can do our own ecology and our own solutions. Next slide, please. So with this long history of use and cultural framework, we have looked at very specific, many compounds beyond the macronutrient platform. We have looked at biphenolics that have digestive inhibitors. We have looked at simple phenolics that are neurotransmitters, L-dopa, serotonin, sleep, melatonin. They're all simple phenolics that come from the diet. So all of them are a very critical part of our ecology, but also a critical part of our dietary needs beyond just macronutrients, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, minerals, and vitamins. There are many other fine-tuning elements. For example, isoflavonoids, they are important part of our hormonal regulation, endocrine responses, flavonoids, antimicrobials. So there are much more diverse array of phytochemicals that are part of the overall regulatory framework of the ecology that are a very critical part of our biology that we need to sustain and need to bring into our food system. Next slide, please. And so if you see this, I've collected all of this many years of work. What we are seeing in plants is when they try to make this coupling towards freeing up their pentose phosphate pathway to make these protective compounds and run their purine metabolism, they come to a unique coupling where they do not waste their Krebs cycle, but also couple it to a proline couple response where they can still run the mitochondrial pathway for energy, but also run the pentose phosphate pathway. So allowing mitochondria and pentose phosphate pathway to be channeled efficiently, they can make all these protective pathway possible and optimize the phytochemicals and many of these protective compounds. So this is how we are trying to redesign these missing pieces of the diet that is we are seeing now, beyond just the macronutrient model and the micronutrient model. So this model is also important of how we build climate resilience. We need to go beyond just carbon fluxes and nitrogen fluxes. We need to go to other fine-tuned regulation that's there in plants, but also crosses over into human biology. So we have to have a deeper look at the eukaryotic biology and how they emerged from an evolutionary perspective to a current. And so this is many years of work, many postdocs and PhDs. So we use this model to optimize crop plants. We see it's not just starch and carbohydrates and proteins that are required, but also how does the plant in leaf and seed and roots optimize this pathway to make all of these protective compounds that then can be brought into the diet. But at the same time, by doing such coupling, we can also build this towards climate resilience. So this pathway is very much important both for climate resilient crop system where the carbon is shuffled towards this, but also by doing that, we also building more diverse, healthy food system. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have applied this rationale to diabetes. It's type 2 diabetes, and if you see globally, next slide, diabetes trends have worsened. Diabetes trend have worsened, and you can see currently by 2030 600 million people, and India is part of this. It's taking a lot of healthcare budgets to solve this. In the US itself, where 15% of the population are diabetic, and in fact about 120 are pre-diabetic. 1/3 of the population is pre-diabetic, and therefore drugs will not solve it. We have to solve it with food. Many layers of the diabetic pathway can be solved with food, and that's what I'll come to. Next slide, please. So if you look at our food system and we correct it with the redox biology, every stage of this digestive pathway that can slow the glucose down to give insulin time to regulate is found in the food systems. They're found in crop plants, alpha amylase inhibitors, alpha glucosidase inhibitors. So if you get a whole profile of multiple foods that have these digestive inhibitors, you don't need drugs. You give your glucose pathway more time to function and work well, slow it down, right? You get a whole food profile that can regulate at each of these steps. So many of my students look at different ecology and different food system and processed food system and look for these bioactive compounds that regulate these digestive pathways so that you can build in these protective mechanism in the food itself and don't go to the drugs at all, right? So this is possible. And if you look at the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so every step of the glucose diabetes complication pathway, glucose control, beta cell function, microvascular regulation, blood pressure control, lipid control. Plants have compound to counter this. If we take a wholesome, diverse diet, even from a North Indian diet or South Indian diet or East Indian, it doesn't matter, your local diet. A combination of the local diet. Next, previous slide, please. A combination of the local diet does have all the countermeasures for this. So we have applied this to Native Americans here in the US who are suffering the most in terms of these challenges. Next slide, please. So if you look at our Native Americans here, they have 2 to 3 times higher propensity towards diabetes and its complication. The average death is around 57, 58, whereas the average American lives 79 to 82, men and women. So they have this proportion of their diabetes directly related to the average deaths, how long they live. So this comorbidity burden, as I showed you in the COVID response too, is a serious burden. So even in the COVID response, the Native American population, here it's average 2.5 times. There it's 3 times higher. Average Americans 1,700 deaths per million, whereas in the Native American population it's 5,000 to 6,000 deaths per million, and they have the higher comorbidity burden. So this is a burden. Even we can see some trends of this even in India too. The comorbidity is increasing, especially in urban environments. So next slide, please. So if you see this COVID-19 has exposed this. So especially poor population in rich countries have suffered the most. Poor rural population have been able to get their more local diverse diets. Like Haiti, they were very poor, but yet they were forced to live in rural areas and depend on their own food system. They have just 22 COVID deaths per million. But if you're poor in a rich country, you are likely to get this bad macronutrient imbalance food that moves you towards comorbidity. Okay, so this is going to be seen more and more, because if the cells, your metabolic cells are linked to the obesity, your immune cells are also going to be coupled to that. And so COVID-19 mortality and comorbidity, there is a link that's emerging, and it's clearly it's in addition to the vaccines, in addition to sanitation and all of these other protective measures, we need to correct our food imbalance and dietary protection pathway as well. Next slide, please. So with this, we are looking at even gestational diabetes, because the propensity of the child towards diabetes can be set in the womb itself, at a maternal level, and then at every stage as the child emerges. So we need to manage this glycemic load much better. And so gestational diabetes and child nutrition is the first place where we can manage that. Next slide, please. So with this, here is an example where we looked at the indigenous food system of North America among the native people, and looked at the anti-diabetic factors in their traditional food, in their diverse traditional food. For example, here we have the Three Sisters crop, colored corn, colored bean, and pumpkin and squash. And if you look at the anti-diabetic, anti-blood pressure components, they're very rich in these, as opposed to refined flour, refined sugar, refined salt, refined oil that they get in the calorie model. So if they go to their traditional wholesome foods, they're rich in these disease protective compounds. So we're trying to build this back. Next slide, please. So we are trying to see how do we build the crop production system. Next slide. Likewise, one of my students, she's from Peru. It's same problem there. So when the indigenous people go from the high Andes to the cities, they move towards diabetes and these comorbidity. And you can see all over Latin America, COVID deaths are very high, especially in poor urban environments. It's like 1,500 to 2,000 deaths per million. But in the rural, it's less. And as they have a more diverse diet, the comorbidity burden is much lower. So she, in a PhD study, she studied how these traditional indigenous crops are much higher in these chronic disease protecting compounds. So why should we go back to these diverse traditional food system for health outcomes, but also climate resilience outcomes? Next slide, please. And so here what we're trying to do is, so can we bring this diverse diet, health targeted food system and with ecological diversity into our local food production system, into individual gardens, a community garden or a community system globally. For example, most of the food, as I told you, most of the food production on the planet, 70% of the food is produced by 500 million small farmers. So we can build cooperatives around value-added, diverse food system. We'll be ecologically more resilient, but also in terms of food production resilience, also health-targeted food resilience will be better. And therefore, we need to rethink how our ecology-driven food system have to be reconfigured, but also in the large-scale production too. So every facet of agriculture has to be rethought with the ecology health target in mind. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, so we were just, we can continue. Next slide. Yeah, so this way we now look at the diversity of these pumpkin. And so when we look at these, we can get many of these bioactive compounds that are rich across these varieties that are not commonly consumed. So we need to bring back this diversity into our food system and daily consumption. Next slide. So here is an example where one of my students' grandfather, he was a medicine man in the indigenous community. He had this old seed of a old squash, and when we when we sort of regrew this and looked at the anti-diabetic factors, they're very high, but yet it's not commonly consumed. So we're trying to revive these old varieties because many of the health components are much better in these. And so next slide. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So we are also seeing how do we optimize this through our food processing. Next slide. We also have a local wild rice that grows in the lakes here. And you see, you have a lot of anti-diabetic factors there. So I have a few projects in India where we are trying to bring back the highland rice in Karnataka, coastal rice that's in the brackish water. They are much more resilient, but also very high. They may be low yielders, but very high in these anti-diabetic factors. And so bringing back these old millets and old rice back so we can get many of these health-targeted, climate-resilient crops back into our food system. Next slide, please. And so one of our goals is here in the indigenous community, how do we now bring the diversity of their crops for pumpkins, wild rice, some of their local berries, a lot of edible roots which are high in oligosaccharide that are prebiotic rich, like parsnip. They used to consume this before. Parsnip, rutabaga, they're very high in oligosaccharide that are prebiotic. So we are trying to bring this back, integrate them back into a baby food design for maternal and child health, but also look at prevention of these chronic diseases very early in the system, but also bring the value-added platform into agriculture. So with that, we are looking at suitable varieties, optimization of food processing, integration of synergies, evaluation of nutrition. So this wholesome approach to food design and agriculture systems. Next slide, please. And so same way we are trying to see how This is a baby food design that we are trying to integrate with their local wild rice, aronia berry, local berry, sweet potato, and to see how maternal health and child health can be managed to prevent gestational diabetes, because it leads even the child to have propensity to diabetes very early. So next slide, please. Okay, so overall, what we are trying to see, can we build a local ecology-driven, diverse crop system that's climate resilient, but also bring all the good food processing technology that's there to keep those health benefits within the food, for a food processing platform? Can we do that? And the answer is yes. So we can still have all the modern tools, but not lose sight of diversity that's important for resilience and health outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we are having this system from production to marketing. So especially in small farming communities, we need to build cooperatives for scale. So how can we build this value-added platform on a cooperative model where we have sustainable production strategies, small cooperatives, and all the way to value addition at every level, processing, food formulation, and every level. And so there are many examples around the world where 50, 100 farmers get together, and then through their organization, they structure these value-added food platforms. Next slide, please. And so one of the big outcomes from our many years of research is, as we face climate change and also all these major health challenges, can we look at the ecological basis of our food system and the common control points of our ecology and use them with rigorous metabolic logic to build both climate resilient food systems and their diversity, but also the same outcomes also have health benefits? So the answer is yes. So many of the same metabolic pathway that's important for the resilience of plants in nature is also relevant for many of the chronic diseases we face. Of course, they are autotrophic eukaryotes. We are also, sort of heterotrophs. We consume. We are not autotrophs, so we consume their food from plants and animal foods, or animals that eat plants. But what we're seeing is the oxygen biology logic is same. The carbon fixation logic is the same. Water integration is the same. The nitrogen integration is the same. So how do we tap into the eukaryotic biology and the prokaryotic biology and use the redox biology and the microbiome biology to build this dual function inducible phenolics to make a resilient food system as the climate. Okay, next slide, please. So with this kind of metabolic logic, we have the discovery engine that using the microbiome and redox biology platform and how we use this to correct plant agriculture production, and from there through analysis and science-based product design and optimal manufacturing, we can take this discovery engine and build value addition at every level. So using metabolic logic, we can build a very high value chain that meets the current challenges that we face of climate resilience and health outcomes. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. And so the whole message from this is we need a systems approach where we see the evolution of the ecology as the foundation from which we take our clues to retune our food system, both from soil health to human health. And so how do we address this from a redox biology, oxygen biology platform, microbiome biology, and correct this at every level and bring this into value addition to our farming community? It provides a new, better ways to build value addition and to build the farmer value too. So this diversity is critical to resilience. is critical to resilience of our food and agriculture system, is critical to resilience of our health, but also important for resilience of our ecology and economic system. And therefore, globally, we hope that this cooperative model around small farming communities can help to build back this diversity of food systems, plant, animal integrated food system, and build a value chain all the way from um, climate needs, ecological needs to human health. So with this approach, my take-home message to student is use a much more systems approach where the control point logic can help you to solve and see many problems from the same control point. And that shapes your hypothesis. And from there, you can see how food is linked to health, health is linked to energy, energy is linked to environment. So these are the foundations of where the breakdown is occurring. But if you look at it with a systems control logic and then build your agriculture, this gives you actually more efficient tools, and where your progress and your problem solving can be much more efficient. So you shouldn't go to a reductionist information world. There's a lot of information. But if you have a systems logic and a systems, that's how your brain is also. It works with a systems logic, right? And so if you have a systems logic and a platform of how the system control points work, and then you can apply information accordingly as the problems emerge, as the problems need to be solved. And so this is where the future of biology is systems biology. And so the more intuitive you are within your local logic, and just don't Google and get Wikipedia information. You be more intuitive in seeing local ecology and the framework of Earth's logic, and then you can be a much more a rigorous scientist and a much more intuitive thinker, where you can see problems as they emerge and solve them accordingly. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I'm sorry for the mishap, because I was speaking.
No problem, sir.
So half of the seminar I have repeated, but I was speaking to myself.
Okay. No problem, sir. We were all very excited because your lecture was so innovative. So I was thinking some year back that there should be diet therapy, and today I'm watching your lecture and I'm feeling so happy. I cannot say anything. There is no words. I mean, to thank. We all are thankful to you. And any question from any audience, please? Otherwise, I'm going to conclude the session with a lot of thanks, and thanks a lot, Dr. Professor Shetty, for beautifully addressing this issue of major issue on the earth, that is malnutrition, to every sector and every part of the country, and beautifully telling us about how various traditional food can be helpful if you are looking for, because we are ignoring, and a lot of transgenic crops are dominating. So we are ignoring all those old traditional crops today. So in that time when COVID-19 is there and a lot of loss is there, life loss is there because of lack of nutrition. So COVID-19 is going to change the overall scenario of food system and crop health. So that's how beautifully addressed that we should improve our crop system, food crop system. And before that, we were also discussing the importance of organic agriculture, because in India, if you see, a lot of chemicals are being used for the cropping system, and that's why major crop, if you are evaluating their nutritional value, then they are losing that contents. They are only the fruits or vegetables, lacking totally nutritional aspects. So that's how very, very thankful to you, and I'm very sorry if any kind of problem is there on our
No, that's okay, because the lesson is next time not to go to the full screen. This is the first time it's happened to me, but it happened to a Singapore professor. He didn't know, but he was lecturing for 2 hours. So in my case, it was maybe 30 minutes.
Yes. So just
But it's a
yes, sir. So it was a great idea that I have downloaded your PPT and already shared with my audience.
sure.
So just as soon as you have joined, you can control
Uh-huh.
over all these aspects. So I think that idea we will continue in the next session also. Okay, we will download the PPT first and then share with the co-host.
Sure.
That will be easy and will not be face such kind of disconnection or kind of, and they will be knowing if they are disconnected immediately.
Yeah, I
So,
think another way is maybe not go the full screen. We can
right.
still see our face.
Yes,
So
yes.
in my case, I
Yes.
couldn't see your face, and I thought I
Right.
was,
And that's why I put on my video.
interesting. There's
Yes, sir. Yes.
okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for taking your
All right.
valuable
Thank you.
time
Thank you.
and
Thank,
highlighting
yeah.
so many helpful.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.